Welcome back to the Supply Chain Automation Pilot Program, brought to you by Economic Development Lethbridge. In this session, Session 2, we're going to talk about evaluating the current supply chain, or your current supply chain. We're going to first talk about performance measurement, things like metrics and so forth. We're then going to talk about forecasting, and particularly as it relates to demand and sales. And then finally, we'll talk about different considerations in supply chain design and the supply chain network design and how that might apply to you. We're going to look at these different areas because these areas will help you identify where you want to focus your energy, and where you may want to consider automating within your supply chain. When we look at performance measures, there's different types of performance measures. Ultimately, we're going to look at things like anything that we can quantify or that we can measure, different metrics that we'll look at. When we start to hone in on specific metrics that we're focusing on that are driving the performance of our business, we oftentimes will consider these key performance indicators or KPIs. It's important to note that different levels of business will have different KPIs that they're looking at. The CEO of a business will look at a different KPI than necessarily a functional manager within a business. Similarly, different businesses will look at different KPIs as well. So if you're in a service-based business, you might not worry that much about KPIs that involve inventory or the number of your inventory turnover ratio or any of those types of KPIs, as your inventory may not be terribly relevant to your overall success of your business in a service business. That said, if you're a manufacturing company, your inventory KPIs would probably be quite significant. So your business or the type of business you're in will help to determine what KPIs you're looking at as well. Now, one of the things with KPIs that you want to consider is that we can probably quantify most things in business, but if we have 100 different things that we're trying to keep our eyes on, we're probably not really paying attention to any one of them that well. We look at things like dashboards that typically have a quick visual representation of key KPIs or key performance indicators we're focused on for that particular level within that particular business. There's a reason for that because it helps us keep focused. As time goes on, different managers and different levels of the business, different functional areas may change their KPIs that they look at as their focus in the business shifts. I'd strongly suggest that in a general sense, you don't want to overload yourself by looking at too many KPIs, but focus on one or two or three or four, depending on what business you're in, depending on what level you're in, maybe 4 or 5 or 6. Focus on truly key performance indicators. Once you get them at a level you're comfortable with, then you can look at other ones as well. About different types of or different levels and different businesses having different key performance indicators, let's talk about some examples of performance measures that might be relevant in your business, particularly as we go from a high-level metric to a functional metric to really metrics that relate more to supply chain. And some of this is splitting hairs as to which area you'd put them in. Would it be high-level metrics? Would it be functional metrics? Would it be supply chain metrics? That's really up to the business involved. So at a high level, and a lot of these you'll have seen kind of in an accounting environment, but at a high level we talk about things like gross margin, also known as gross revenue, which is a revenue less direct costs. We look at net margin or net income, that's revenue less all costs. Total revenue compared to previous period or the same period a year ago. A lot of these metrics are valuable when we start looking at them comparatively to last month, last week, last year, or to industry averages and so forth. You can also look at your gross margin, your net margin against previous periods. All of these, again, you can look at against previous periods. Current ratio is your current assets divided by current liabilities, and this is really an indicator of liquidity. Debt to equity is debt compared to equity. How many times more debt do you have than equity? This will be not just liquidity, this will be your overall leverage ratio. Return on investment or return on equity are to see how much your money is working for you. Return on assets, if you're an asset intensive business, you may want to look at what are you making on the assets that you have. Similarly, asset efficiency and asset utilization will look at the amount you're utilizing your assets, and then the efficiency can come in different varieties of what you're doing with that utilization. So those are some of the high level metrics, and depending on the business, you could add a few, you could take a few away. Functional metrics get into different functional areas. So in sales, for example, you might look at accounts receivable turnover or days sales outstanding. So how long does it take to collect? You might look at things like sales per salesperson in a sales area. Other functional metrics you might look at are things like average payment terms for your production materials. Do you pay in 15 days, 30 days? You can look at something called a turn-earn index. So when looking at your inventory turnover ratio, which is how long inventory stays and how long you can sell it, or how long it takes to get rid of your inventory, a turn-earn index looks at high inventory turnover ratio for low margin products, or lower inventory turnover ratio for higher margin products. Turn-earn index is an interesting one to look at, and I encourage you to look into that a little bit further. Inventory days of supply, so if you do not replenish, how many days of inventory do you have? Inventory velocity, percentage of inventory that will be consumed in the next period's forecast, and that period might be a month, it might be a quarter, so forth. You want to look at, within inventory management, what's your excess inventory? What's your percentage of obsolete inventory? And what are your lead times to get that inventory? So those are some functional metrics. And again, depending on the particular function, you're going to find other metrics you can look at. And your business, being unique as it is, will probably have metrics that you want to look at as well. Finally, specific to the supply chain, and again, splitting hairs a little bit, there are some additional metrics you might want to look at, such as a perfect order. So percentage of orders without any issues. How many can you have? How many of your orders do you have with 0 issues on that order? Customer order cycle time. How long from the order to the delivery? That's going to be an important supply chain metric, and that may be one that automation can help you reduce. Expanding that a little bit, and we talk about supply chain cycle time. So if inventory is nothing, how long does it take to fill an order? Cash to cash cycle time. From the cash outlay for materials to receiving cash from the final sale. So not only is that related to your order and your lead time and those types of things, it's also related to your payment terms. Freight bill accuracy. How accurate are your freight bills? Freight cost per unit. How can you reduce that? Are there ways of automating that? Are there ways of setting up min-max systems so you're maximizing your overall loads that you're transporting? Whatever the case might be, how can you get that lower? And again, this may come into place with automation. Finally, one that we want to look at, particularly in Alberta with travel delays that can happen because of weather and so forth, is on-time shipping rates, both incoming and outgoing shipments. So these are some of the metrics that you're going to look at. Some of these are high-level metrics, some are functional area metrics, and some are supply chain, more specific metrics. But understanding these metrics will help us start to understand different areas that we do well in our business and different areas that we could have some improvement on, and what we should be focusing on. And this might help us uncover what area of our business we may want to consider automating. In addition to the metrics that are pretty easy to quantify, There are other measures that we might want to consider or that you might want to consider. And I'm not sure that they're necessarily going to tie in directly to ways that you can automate your business, but we should consider them anyways. Currently, ESG measures are becoming increasingly more and more common. So environmental, social, and governance kind of measures. And there are starting to be more and more ways of measuring these, whether it's carbon outputs and so forth, but there's also subjective measures of these. In addition to your ESG measures, you may also want to consider things like staff morale, and that may be through employee engagement surveys or so forth. This is an area where automation may help, though, is the idea of things like staff morale and some of your more human resource-based kinds of measures. So beyond those kinds of other measures and looking at the different metrics we talked about, what you want to do now is you want to focus in on your particular business, understanding your product, who you are as a company, and really who your customer is and where you are at in that supply chain. And you want to start honing in on some of the metrics and measures that are important for your business. And once you have a sense of where you're at with the business, you may have a sense, and those measures may help you have a sense of what you might want to automate so that you can then focus on some of your true core competencies within your business.